Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this hobby boss Lightning, or a bit more specifically, a P-38L5LO Lightning, which is way more catchy. This is a very cheap, easy assembly kit in 1/72nd scale. The sticker on it said I'd paid $11 for it, and it's been sitting in my stash for a really long time. The box, in my opinion, reflects the low cost, but I figured why not give it a go, and spoilers, I was kind of surprised by the result. Anyway, inside the box we find some sprues. There are two in grey plastic with various plain parts, unsurprisingly, and one sprue of clear plastic with the canopy and some other bits. This looks quite nice if you ask me. It'll probably be a bit fiddly to paint later, but it's nice and clear and it looks to be the right shape, which is what we want. There are also two larger parts that make up the wings and fuselages. I guess it's correct to say that there are two fuselages? I'm no plainsman though, so I don't know. I do like that the wings are mostly one part. It makes things a lot neater in my experience. Let's have a closer look at some of these bits. I have to be honest, my expectations weren't high. For $11 I figured it wasn't going to be that good at all, but the plastic here isn't too bad. The pieces are nice and solid and seem to be well moulded. It's fair to say that I was pleasantly surprised. There isn't a whole lot in the way of mould lines, though they are of course there, and I'm not anticipating a lot of cleanup or modification is going to be needed to get the parts to go together. The Lightning is one of my favourite looking planes. It's so odd and interesting. That said, I'm no expert, and I couldn't tell you exactly how accurate or not the details on this model are, though I'm sure it would make someone who is super serious about planes have a heart attack. Rip them, I guess. For some reason, people would expect an $11 kit to be the most hyper-detailed thing ever, and then get mad when it isn't. However, I think the details are pretty decent, especially considering that price. I can see some things are a little bit soft here and there, and I'm sure some things have simply been omitted, but it doesn't look too bad, and I think it's going to build up to be fairly reasonable. In addition to the plastic in the box, we find a decal sheet. I'm going to leave this in the plastic packaging until I want to use it, just to keep it from any damage, but you can still see that there are a variety of markings. I'm tempted to use the marking that says Pecky because I find that amusing. I'm an adult. The decals look pretty neat. I can't speak of their quality, but I'm sure they're fine. An instruction leaflet is also included. I was kind of surprised that this is in colour. Well, the front and rear are in colour, but the instructions themselves are still in black and white, though they are laid out in a sensible enough way and are easy to understand and follow. For the most part anyway. There were a couple of spots that had me a bit confused, but not many. The back has some painting and marking guides, which are in colour, which is obviously better than grayscale for things like painting guides. It is of course quite basic, but I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to expect a big in-depth painting guide with a kit like this, or any kit really. Let's get started. The first thing I did was to glue the two halves of a pair of fuel tanks together. I'm assuming these are drop tanks anyway. They could be bombs, but I don't think so. The lip around the length of these tanks looks a bit odd, but I'm pretty sure it's meant to be there and isn't some horrendous mould line. It also seems like a decent way to hide where the parts are joined together. Once they're together, I put them aside until there is more plane built to attach them to. And then I make the propellers. The polycaps I neglected to show with the sprues and stuff go here in the spinner cap. Pretty simple. Then the propeller part itself can be glued in. I do like that this comes as a single piece instead of three separate blades. It makes things a little bit less fiddly. Of course, do be sure that this part is the right way around, as I assume I've done. The backing parts can then be glued on, which I suppose would make sense. The result does have a couple of gaps, but that's probably fine, and it could easily be fixed later anyway. I set those aside also until there is more plane, but not before playing with them like a sensible adult, which I am. Now it's cockpit time. I glue the handle part into the control stick. I'm sure there are proper plainsman names for these, but a plainsman I am not. Either way, it's very easy to put these two parts together. Then the seat can be mounted into the cockpit floor, which seems like a pretty good place to attach a seat. It's not the most detailed seat of course, but it will do the job. If you really want to, I bet you could make your own seatbelts and things like that, but I'm not sure it's worth going to that kind of effort for a cheap kit like this. The front wall and I guess control panel part goes into place here. This is keyed, which makes it easy to position this properly. It's followed by this whatever it is, which is a little bit more fiddly to get into place, but not too bad. I can't get my fat fingers in there, so a knife or other tool is helpful for nudging. Then I bring back that control stick thing and install it. It's not too hard to get into place, but of course it did need a bit of nudging before it looked straight and neat. Then this back wall part goes on. It's shaped such that you shouldn't have any trouble getting it into place. And that's the cockpit completed. It probably makes rivet counters a bit upset, but it should look decent enough once it's painted and inside the plane. Better than an empty void under the canopy anyway. The nose wheel comes next. It's a pretty simple matter to glue the wheel onto the landing gear strut, which I think is what you would call it. There is a little bit of play to it, so some nudging was needed to try and get it nice and straight. It looks pretty reasonable to me. It can then be glued into the bottom of the cockpit assembly. And then this forky, supporty, brackety thing goes into place between the floor and the strut. There are some sort of nodules here on the strut, so it kind of clips into place. It looked right to me, so I added glue. And that assembly is yet again put aside to wait until there is more plane in which to install it. A single nose wheel might be enough to land an aircraft on, but I have my doubts. Another 2 pieces of landing gear would be ideal. These need a little bit more assembling than the first one, but not much. This little bracket goes just above the axle part. Once that's in place, I add the wheel. Like the other wheel, this has some play to it and you will probably need to nudge it just a little bit to get it looking straight. Nothing too tricky here, of course, and it could always be much worse. In fact, compared to some other aircraft, I think these wheels fit very well. This other bar can then be glued into place. I was a bit concerned that this might not be perfectly in place, but I got it lined up as neatly as I could. The bar should be flexible enough anyway, that even if it is a little bit out, it should still go into place. It'll just take a little bit of bending. I leave that to bond, and glue the cockpit assembly into the space intended for it in the lower fuselage piece, whatever you might call that. The cockpit assembly goes into place really nicely. I was kind of expecting a little bit of trouble from having the landing gear already attached, but it wasn't an issue at all. I test fit with the upper half of the plane, and everything seems to be in good order. I then add some detail to the upper half of the Lightning, starting with these, I believe, superchargers? These are a different part for each side of the plane, and I found I had to apply quite a bit of pressure to get them in place. Once they're in and glued down, they do look pretty nice though. Very supercharger. Then come the vertical stabilizers. These simply slot into place from the rear. The fit looks pretty good with pretty much no extra effort. I was kind of expecting to have to spend a good amount of time nudging this to try and get it straight relative to the rest of the plane, but fortunately that wasn't so. I glued it in place and was satisfied. I followed that with this little thingy on a little pylon. I think this is some sort of weight. Again, I'm not really a plane guy, so I'm not sure. It's just something I heard. At any rate, it goes into place pretty easily, though I would suggest leaving it off until later. I ended up bumping this piece out of place at least 1,000 times during the rest of the build. Next, I install this clear part. It probably would have been a bit easier to install this before adding the cockpit, but here we are. The video is a little bit out of focus due to incompetence, but you can sort of see that they're in place, whatever they are. Lights of some sort, I guess. I then glued the main upper and lower parts of the plane together. There's a lot of plastic to join here, so I do it in sections, starting around the cockpit and central wing sections. I applied a bunch of pressure and some nudging to minimize gaps and any weird join issues. Then I do the tail booms, if that's what you would call them. This is not too hard to do really, though some might suggest using rubber bands. I feel like that would take a little bit longer to set up than it does for the plastic to bond, and it would be pretty difficult to apply on a plane shaped like this. Eventually, I had the parts together neatly enough. A bit more cleanup is going to be needed later on though. I then installed the doors for the landing gear wells. It took a little bit of force to get the part into place, and I was a little bit worried about damaging things, but I did get them in without any issue. I rather like this part. Being a single part for both doors makes it very easy to install and have them both open at the same angle. Makes it look nice and consistent. I then install the door for the nose gear. This is similar to the previous part, except there's only one door. I still had to use a bit of pressure to get it into place, but it's nothing too challenging. You could probably model this plane with the doors closed too, though it would take a bit more effort to modify the parts. There were some little detail-y parts that were supposed to go inside the landing gear wells. It was pretty hard to get them into place, and I'm pretty sure I did it wrong. And I think it would have been significantly easier to do this before installing the doors. At this point I can't remember if this is a case of me being a rebel, or the instructions not being clear enough on how things should be done. Possibly a little from column A and a little from column B. I ended up only putting this stuff on one side. I doubt anybody's going to see it to notice anyway. I then install what I think are air intakes of some sort. There are very clear indentations on the sides of the tail booms for these. The inner and outer parts are different for each side, so do pay attention to the instructions so that you can avoid messing up which one goes where. I had to apply a fair bit of pressure, and they didn't go on quite perfectly, especially the inner one, but I'm sure this can be fixed easily enough. Then it's time for some clear bits. These little disc thingies go on the sides of the engine cowlings. I was told on stream that these are mirrors to allow the pilot to see if the landing gear is down properly, and that does make sense. It's probably quite nice to be certain if your landing gear is down or not. You could leave this off until after painting, but you could also just paint it a metallic colour. I glued it into place because I didn't want to lose the part. Then I installed the nose, which comes with machine guns already installed. Wish my nose came with machine guns. This part is easy to put on. It's not perfect, but it does fit. The gap around it is a little bit inconsistent, though there should be panel lines there anyway, so that's fine. It's just not perfectly flush with the rest of the plane all the way around. The engines go on next. These go on in much the same way as the nose. The fit is a little bit better for the most part, and they are also designed such that the joins are where the panel lines would be. The engine on the plane's right went on a lot better than the left, where the part is a bit misaligned, which is unfortunate but probably fixable. I then install the drop tanks. They go on pretty easily, though a little bit of nudging was needed to get them nice and straight. The landing gear still hasn't been installed, which does make it a bit awkward to sit the plane down, so why not install those? There are mounting holes for those landing gear assemblies to mount into, which does make it very easy to do. These are probably the best landing gear I've ever dealt with. They're very easy to position, they don't flop out of place once you put them on the plane, and it's very easy to be sure that the wheels are nice and straight. I don't build a lot of planes, so my experience there probably isn't worth a lot, but I've had more difficulty installing landing gear on pretty much every other plane I've built. I think the result is quite good, though unfortunately the plane is a little bit tail heavy, so it's not going to sit properly on the landing gear. Clearly the way to fix this would have been to install some weight in the nose before gluing that part on. It's a bit late for that now. You probably haven't noticed, but the propellers aren't yet installed, so I put those on next. They go onto these little axle-y bits on the front of the engine. I decided to position both propellers the same way as each other because I like the consistency. Clearly those propellers haven't added enough weight to make the plane sit properly, but that's okay. I wasn't really expecting that to happen. I then add the lower weighty thing to the rear wing part. Like I said earlier, it would have been a bit better to install the upper one at the same time as this lower one, just to avoid having to nudge it back into place however many times. But what's done is done, and the parts do look okay. I then installed the pitot tube on the underside of the left wing. Not too much to say about this. And then the canopy, which I didn't film myself installing, but it does more or less just drop right into place. I've left this part unglued so that I can paint the cockpit later. Do you have any idea how hard it has been to not make jokes about the cockpit? Anyway, that's the Hobby Boss 1/72nd scale P-38 Lightning completed, and I have to say that I'm pretty happy with it. Unfortunately, after building this model on stream, I almost immediately dropped it and broke one of the propeller blades on the plane's left, the one at the top. Fortunately, I managed to fix that, and it's next to impossible to tell where it's been repaired. Just a fun fact, I guess. Is that fun? I don't know. Anyway, I think this model is pretty decent. It's exceeded my expectations by quite a bit, especially considering that it cost $11. The detail is fairly reasonable. It's going to need a bit of cleanup and filler in some areas before painting, but that is the case with a lot of models anyway. I'm sure there's bound to be at least one baby that gets all bent out of shape at me for not automatically shitting on anything that isn't the highest quality, most expensive kit. I mean, it's obviously not the hyper-detailed model some people might be looking for, but then those people aren't going to be looking at kits that cost $11. Well, they might, but they are going to be disappointed. Probably deservingly so. Anyway, for what it costs, it's pretty good, and I was surprised by that. My expectations were low, though that was based entirely on the price, having never built any other Hobby Boss planes prior to this one. I think maybe a lot of people might share those expectations, and maybe this video makes them reconsider. I've no idea if the other very cheap plane kits like this from Hobby Boss are similar or not, but I certainly am willing to pick up a couple more at some point to try them out. And maybe they won't sit in my stash for hundreds of years before being built. I'd been holding onto this one as some sort of emergency filler kit in case I needed something quick and easy to put together for a stream or video. Speaking of stream, I did build this kit live on stream, though it was quite some time ago. It's been in my editing backlog for quite a while now. I don't know if anybody's been waiting for this particular video with bated breath, but it's here now. If you would like to watch me build models live on stream, and also find out what's likely to be coming up soon or not so soon on my videos, head on over to my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Herbert_Erpaderp, or follow the link down in the description. I usually stream model building twice a week, so why not drop in and say hi? This kit was pretty quick and easy to build. I wasn't expecting anything overly complicated though, so that's not surprising. So I think if you're in the market for a fun and quick build, possibly for a beginner or young modeler, I think this is a fairly good choice. Anyway, what do you think? Have you built this kit or any other cheap Hobby Boss planes before? Do you think the Lightning looks rad as heck? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to be awesome and a big help to me, feel free to share this video with anyone you think might enjoy it or get something out of it. And don't forget to subscribe, follow, ring the bell, become a YouTube member or patron, and all the other things you do on YouTube and social media. Links to all of my things are in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.